Before we start the tour. Please don't leave the main tour and wander off on your own. Many of the rooms have debris on the floor and shouldn't be entered. Please don't cross any of the hazard tapes. A guide will be at the rear of the party at all times, just to keep an eye. The floor of the bunker is wet and uneven in places. Please watch where you're walking and take care when using the stairs. Hold on to the handrail at all times. Throughout the bunker there's extensive mould growth. This is perfectly safe, but we ask that you don't touch any mould or fungus. Please also don't touch any of the stalactites hanging from the ceiling, as these will break off easily. There are no rats or nasty things in the bunker. Firefighting equipment is located at entry level and at each level, at each end of each corridor on both lower levels. That there might be a devastating air attack on central London and that Whitehall might be rendered unusable. So the government at that time was already considering alternative locations that the government could move to. There were several schemes. One was to move to the West Country or to Corsham, and we know that at Corsham there were a number of disused quarries that were being taken over by the government and the military for use. West Midlands was also considered, but the favoured proposal was to move to the northwest suburbs. It was closer to London, and Churchill certainly didn't like the idea of moving out of London. So 4 bunkers were proposed, one for the Army, one for the Admiralty, one for the Air Ministry, and one for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and for the government. The Army lost out, which is unfortunate. Their bunker was going to be built at Kneller Hall, which was the Army School of Music in Twickenham, but it never got built. The Admiralty, their bunker was just off the Edgware Road, at the junction with Oxgate Lane. It's very similar to this, and that had the code name Oxgate. The Air Ministry, their one got built. That was at Harrow, on what is now the Kodak factory at Harrow. Again, a 2-level bunker, underground 2 levels, more levels above ground. That one's still there today, pretty thoroughly stripped out, and Kodak, they were friendly to us eventually, but they generally don't like taking people in. So that's the Air Ministry one. That was called Station Z, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military, Hoi Polloi, and the War Cabinet, they came here to Dollis Hill, and that's where the bunker that would have run the war was located. We'll tell you a bit more about that as we go along, but first let's take you through that the spoil was taken away in bread vans, and we certainly know that it was all dumped at Welsh Harp. Now take a look at this frame, this door frame here. About 8 inches of steel. This would have been the frame for a blast door, a steel and concrete blast door, sealing off the lower level of the bunker. There's a blast door here, there's 2 other stairways down, they've all got a blast door as well, to ensure that anyone in the lower level, which was actually the operational hub of the bunker, they were totally sealed from anyone on this level. So if this level was penetrated, at least they would still be safe down there. Right, I mentioned the spiral staircases. This is one of the spiral staircases. If you don't fancy it, it's perfectly safe. It'll take my weight, and I don't see anyone heavier than me. I don't know, Mark might be. No, probably not. But if it takes my weight, it'll take your weight. But if you really don't fancy it, then do let one of us know, and we'll take you down by the main stairs. Otherwise, I'll see you down at the bottom. How do you mean, how do you maintain it?
So if it breaks down or something?
Well, there's more, where the other side of the blast door, there's more filtration plant down here, which you'll see behind you.
Right.
Is that everyone down?
Yeah.
Right, at this point we're 40 feet below ground. This lower level has 8 feet of reinforced concrete between this level and the upper level. The upper level has another 4 feet of reinforced concrete above that, and then sand and gravel up to the surface. So 40 feet below ground here. And in 1940, at that depth, this was supposed to withstand a direct hit from the largest high explosive bomb that the Germans could deliver. We had a bomb called the Tall Boy, which was bigger, and that would have penetrated a bunker at this depth with that level of reinforced concrete protection. But the Germans didn't have anything of that kind, so in theory, never put to the test, in theory, anyone down here should have been safe. We've seen the air handling plant on the upper level, which is duplicated on this level. Again, we've got some fans, the fan up there, more filter units, so any contaminated air from the upper level could still be re-filtered down on this level to ensure that anyone down here would have been able to survive. To run all that plant, obviously there needs to be power. Normally the bunker would run off the mains, but if there was a failure in the main supply, the bunker had to be totally self-sufficient. So it has its own generator, which is here. I'm not familiar with this make of generator, but I'm told it is a well-known make. It's a Tanguy Ricardo. Do we know them? No, the last tour it seemed to be quite well known. It's even got its starting handle. Are you feeling strong? Yeah, I'm going to try and see if we can get it started. Oh, come on. Oh, he's hopeless. He said it was strong. It would normally, of course, have been started by a battery, and that black box there is the battery charger for the battery. It's seized up. In fact, when I first came down here in 1999, there was 2 feet of water in this room, as there was over the whole of this level. So, you know, the water was sort of up to here. We brought the health and safety people down. Before we could open it up to the public, we had to get a health and safety certificate. They got to the bottom of the stairs, saw the water and said, no, we're not going down there. You get the water pumped out and we'll come and inspect it. So we had to survey and photograph the bunker while wading through 2 feet of water. So it was turn the trouser legs up and put waders on, and we came down here, photographed the bunker, surveyed the bunker, eventually got the water out, got health and safety in, and we got our certificate to let you all in. So this is the generator that would have supplied the air handling plant, the lighting, and some electrical equipment. Typewriters, of course, would have been manual in those days, so it didn't actually have to do a lot. It didn't run the telephone system, that all ran off batteries, so that's why it's not that big. That's a day tank, so there's sufficient fuel in there to run the generator for a few hours, but the main tanks, of course, would have been on the surface. But it was never expected that people would be down here for more than a couple of days. If there was a bomb attack or a gas attack, once the gas had dissipated, then the bunker would be opened up again, and whoever was down here could have gone back up to the surface. Now this box here, unfortunately the light up there has packed up, so take a look at this. This is the control cabinet for all the plant in this room, all the dials there, again dating from 1939, so everything in this room is original. Would be a typical room. If you've been to the Battered Brick Operations Room at RAF Uxbridge, you will see such a room. This is the same thing, but here it wasn't done with 2 levels in the gallery, it was done on 1 level with windows into the adjacent offices, taking the place of the gallery. So we've got 3 windows there into offices, maybe the one for the Air Ministry, one for the Admiralty, one for the Army. We don't really know. Unfortunately, records about this bunker haven't been kept. The National Archive, formerly the PRO, were the people who keep records, but if the records aren't passed to them, then they haven't got them to keep. And unfortunately, they have very little information about this bunker. Likewise, the Imperial War Museum, they've got a few pictures taken in the 1980s, but they have very little information about the bunker during its operational life from 1940. We do know this was the map room, the operations room, and the maps would have been on this wall here. And if you look at these fluorescent light fittings, now fluorescent light did come around in the 1930s, so these are original, and you'll see the shades are angled shades, angling the light onto the maps that would have been located on this wall. So it would have been a very busy room. This is where the war in Europe and elsewhere would have been run from. It wasn't run from here because there never was a devastating attack on Whitehall. This would only have been used had the Cabinet War Rooms in Whitehall been taken out of action, which wouldn't have been difficult because the Cabinet War Rooms weren't in a purpose-built bunker. They were in a converted basement, So if that building had been destroyed, the War Cabinet, the Joint Chiefs of Staff would have all come here, and this would have been where the war militarily would have been run from. But the military do what the government say, and the government are in the Cabinet War Room, which is at the far end of the bunker, where we'll go to now. Window. If you look through into the room through that window, we can't go in there, I'm afraid, because if you touch any of the timber in there, it falls down. But that is the Teleprinter Room, and the main means of communication during the war was by telephone and teleprinter. So any important messages that came in by teleprinter could have been passed from the Teleprinter Room through the message hatch in the wall directly into the Cabinet War Room. The normal method of passing messages around in a bunker would have been by runners. So people would run from room to room with the messages. But obviously, being an adjacent room, you can just pass it through a hatch in the wall. So, having seen the bunker during its construction, Churchill eventually decided, somewhat reluctantly we think, that the War Cabinet should at least come here to see if the bunker was able to fulfil its function. And that's exactly what happened on the 3rd of October 1940. Churchill and the War Cabinet came here. The bunker was already available for use and was manned by skeleton staff. So Churchill came here and chaired the War Cabinet on that date. He never came back. He didn't like the bunker. He knew it could be used, it could fulfil its function. But in his memoirs, written in the mid-1950s, he described it as far from the light of day. I think that made it clear what he thought of it. He remembered it as being somewhere near Hampstead, which was being somewhat economical with the truth. In 1955 it had been declassified for many years. There's no reason why he shouldn't have been more accurate with its location. But he just remembered it as being near Hampstead, and he never came back. But the War Cabinet did. They came back here in May 1941. Again, not because they had to, but because once again they wanted to confirm it would fulfil its intended purpose, and probably more important because at that time the Australian Premier Robert Menzies was visiting the country, and whenever he came he always addressed the Cabinet on the current Australia and New Zealand war effort. So it was thought that it would be a good idea to bring him here, show him the kind of protected accommodation we had available, and he came here, addressed the War Cabinet, and I'm sure he was impressed by this location. As I said, Churchill didn't chair that cabinet. It was chaired by the Lord Privy Seal Clement Attlee, and we were privileged to escort Clement Attlee's grandson, the present Lord Attlee, here about 4 years ago. When we first opened the bunker up to the public, he saw the publicity on the TV. He contacted us, asked if he could visit. We said no. No, of course we didn't. He said yes. We picked him up from the House of Lords, brought him here, and he spent 2 hours here touring the bunker and was certainly very interested to see the place where his grandfather had chaired the War Cabinet in 1941. Right, we're going to take a look at a little room now. I'll go into it. Can I ask you...
What were the chances that they actually would have survived?
They probably wouldn't have survived a direct hit. They never had a direct hit, but it was just a strengthened basement. So it was an existing building in the basement, and there were beams, metal beams were put in to strengthen the ceiling. So it would have probably survived a near miss, but it wouldn't have survived a direct hit from the largest bombs that the Germans had. Right, there were 2 emergency exits from the bunker. One is at the far end, which we will use in the event of something happening down here. The other one was at this end, around the corner there. You'll see a sign on the wall, emergency exit, which isn't original from the wartime. Sadly, that has been filled up now from the surface. Just through the doorway there's a brick wall, and then beyond that, that's been backfilled. There would have been another spiral staircase up to the surface. So 3 ways in, 3 ways out of the bunker. Right, we'll move now into there. They would have come into this room, they would have hung from these hangers on the walls here, passed through that slot in the wall over there, and into the adjacent room.
Like that nowadays.
Well, where do you think they kept their wire? It's an MDF, main distribution frame. A lot of people were looking in the right direction. It's basically a telephone exchange. If you'd like to come around this side, unfortunately my torch is dying a bit. So this is the gubbins. This is the bits that actually work. These are switches, relays, and you'll see there 100 PRS to MDF sub-basement, 100 pairs of cable to the main distribution frame in the sub-basement. So that's another one of these down on the lower level. You've got another 100 pairs there. But on this one, there's some quite important lettering. CWR. Any thoughts on what that might be? Exactly. We don't know that that was the switch to switch the cables to the cabinet war room, but it says CWR. It does seem to make sense that that's what that stands for, as we had a cabinet war room downstairs. So a vital important room, this room is the telephone exchange. The switchboard room, where all the little ladies would have been sitting on their nice wooden switchboard. And we know that simply because we actually had a lady a couple of years ago who came on one of the tours here, and she was a switchboard operator. And that was the room where she was. I think she'd have been out of a job very quickly, because in those days, of course, you didn't ask. Now, a couple of people have asked about how long the bunker functioned for. Not very long. The bunker was ready for use in the end of 1940, but already by that time the government were planning to replace it. Churchill certainly never wanted to come here, and the government had already selected a new site in Martlesham Street, Southwest 1, to build a new bunker. It was a derelict, two derelict gas holders were removed, leaving two large circular pits. Within those pits, two bunkers were built. 1.5 stories below ground, 1.5 stories above ground, each with 600 rooms, and they were known as the North and South Rotunda. And by 1943, the standby cabinet war room moved from here to the North Rotunda. It was a new war room, a new code name, that had the code name Anson. So this bunker was actually decommissioned in 1943, less than 3 years after it had been commissioned. It had never been used in anger, it only had a cabinet staff, and from time to time personnel would have come here, like our switchboard operator, just to man the equipment for a short period and make sure that it was kept serviceable. So the bunker was decommissioned in 1943, locked up for the remainder of the war, but at the end of the war, the Post Office Research Station was still active on the surface, and in fact they were here until 1969 when they moved to Martlesham Heath in Suffolk. So certainly the upper level of the bunker was used by the post office. There were some labs down here, there was some storage, there were also a number of social clubs used some of these rooms. There was a music club that used one of the rooms, a record club, there were some sports clubs used these rooms as well. So that was the only use it had in the 1950s and 1960s. The suspended ceiling here certainly dates from that period, so does the slot in the wall. That certainly wasn't original. I don't know, that could be several things. It could be a social club, that could be a bar, and I could just imagine a barman there serving a nice pint of warm red barrel, if anyone remembers that. Delicious drink it was. Why it phased out, I don't know. More likely could have been a recording studio, but we really don't know. Now we'll move into this room here, and again, it spills over, not good for the shank pile. So, Darlington tile floor, sink, so if there's a battery spill, you can just mop it up and no harm done. So whenever you see a tile floor in the bunker, should you ever visit another one, at Dollis Hill Lane, and the first block of flats on your left is Neville's Court. That was finished just before the war, that was commandeered by the government. 2 flats were knocked into one for Churchill, so it would have been a quarter-mile drive or walk to the accommodation. Not a lot of use in the event of an attack and the bunker being sealed in, because they wouldn't be able to get to their bed, so they would have just had to bunk down on the floor. Maybe Churchill had a camp bed, maybe he didn't, we really don't know. Toilets? Where are the toilets? They're upstairs. Again, not a lot of use in the event of the bunker being sealed down, so it's a matter of fire buckets. Probably Churchill had an Elson chemical toilet, but the facilities here were very basic. The canteen, sorry, no, they shared facilities with the post office, who were up on the surface. They shared the post office research station canteen, and the kitchen would have been up there as well. But if the bunker's sealed down, well, you can go in a fire bucket, you've still got to eat and drink. So there was a very basic heater to make cups of tea, but it was fairly basic. So you've got the ventilation again coming into this room, so all the rooms were vented. We thought we'd found some original rations actually, tins here, but caustic soda was probably not very tasty, so I think probably not. So facilities were basic, but it was hoped that nobody would be here for more than a couple of days at most. And most of the time that people were in the bunker, there wasn't an attack on the surface, so they didn't have to be sealed down, so they would use the post office canteen. The surface block, because this was a 3-level building, 2 levels below ground, 1 level above ground. The level above ground has now gone. Did the bunker ever get reused as a bunker? Sadly, no. In the 1950s, there was once again a bunker mentality. In the nuclear era, with the threat of a Soviet attack, England was divided into regions and sub-regions. London itself was divided into 4 sub-regions: northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. Each of them had a bunker and would have had a regional controller or commissioner who would have run his region from that bunker. If he had lost communications with headquarters, he would have been solely in charge. He had power of life and death. He could have said, shoot the looters, and the looters would have been shot. So bunkers were built in southwest London, at Cheam, Churchill Road in Cheam, southeast London, Kemnal Road in Chislehurst, northeast London in Wanstead, Northumberland Road, I think, or something like that, and in northwest, well, actually it was in North London, Partingdale Lane, Mill Hill. And then it was later actually subdivided into a 5th one, and a 5th bunker was built in Southall, and the one at Chislehurst was damped, so they moved to one in London Road, in Penge. But the Partingdale Lane bunker in Mill Hill was damp, so they were looking for a new location for it. So in the 1950s, this was considered, but this was damper still, so it was never chosen. Then in the Thatcher era, there was once again a bunker mentality. Everyone had new bunkers in that era. Central government had bunkers, regional government had bunkers, and in London, the by then 5 sub-regional controls needed a central bunker to report to. It was always a reporting chain, if that chain could be maintained. And this was considered as the central bunker that the 5 regional control centres would have reported to. But the North Rotunda was considered far more suitable, so that was chosen over Paddock. Ken Livingstone had the decision, and this bunker was never used again. The post office moved out of the site in about 1969, moving to Martlesham Heath in Suffolk, where they still are today, leaving the site empty. It was initially taken over by Schweppes as their London headquarters, but we know they didn't use the bunker. They were only here for a couple of years, and then it was taken over as the Dollis Hill trading estate. All the buildings on the surface were used as an industrial estate, and in fact some of them still are. I think they call it something else now. But that we know that they didn't use the bunker. The bunker was sealed. We certainly know in the 1950s that in the map room below, some of the maps were still on the walls when the post office were here, but they have sadly disappeared over the years. Nobody knows where they have gone to. Certainly into private hands. Hopefully they still exist, but somebody has got them somewhere. We would love to get them back. I don't think we'd want to put them here because it's too damp and they wouldn't survive, but if we could have at least duplicate copies which could be sort of encapsulated in plastic, that would be nice to put them back on the walls. So there was never any use for the bunker after World War II. In the late 90s, you come into the airlock chamber, close the outer door, pressurise the airlock chamber so it's the same air pressure as in here, open the inner door, and anyone can come into the bunker. You'll notice a sign saying to floor 28. So upstairs to floor 28, this is floor 27. That might suggest there's another 26 floors below us. Sadly, it's not the case. It's a strange post office numbering system from the 1950s. On any particular site, all the floors of all the buildings are consecutively numbered. So one 2-storey building might be floor 7 and 8. Another 4-storey building might be 9, 10, 11, 12. It just so happens this 3-storey building is 26, 27, 28. So it's nothing to do with the actual number of floors on the bunker. Right, before I finish, I'd better tell you a little bit about the people who are actually taking around the bunker today. We're an organisation called Subterranea Britannica. We were formed in 1974 to research man-made and man-used underground spaces. We approached the Network Housing Association in 1999 to see if we could get into the bunker. No one had been in here for many years, and reluctantly they eventually gave us the keys. They didn't want to come themselves, but they gave us the keys. Once they realised that we appeared to know what we were doing, they said, well, we've got to open the bunker to the public soon, would you be prepared to run the public tours for us? And we were absolutely delighted, and we've been doing it now for 7 years. We open one day in the spring, which is always a weekday, so that schools can come, and one day in conjunction with London Open House will be open on the Saturday, where everyone who hears about the open house events, they find out and come as you have done. If you'd like to know a bit more about Subterranea Britannica, we've got a leaflet up on the surface. If you'd like to know a bit more about Paddock, we've got a leaflet up on the surface. If you have any more questions, the next tour will be coming down soon. So again, if you can ask one of the guys when we get up to the surface.